people come in. Welcome everybody on this cold night. Glad to have you come out. My name is Marty Reed. I'm the state librarian at the Department of Libraries, and it's my privilege to welcome you here and to let you know that we're, for the first time, co-sponsoring the John Swan Lecture with the Vermont Library Association, which we're very happy to do. I don't need to tell this audience about libraries as champions of intellectual freedom. It's a hallmark of what libraries are, what we do day in and day out, and so we're thrilled to have you here, Dr. Sova, with us tonight. I just took a couple minutes looking through your books, took them off the shelf, brought them down, and it is always remarkable to look through these books and look at the titles that have been challenged. We see these titles year in and year out, and they cover everything from picture books for children, fiction, nonfiction, some of the literature that we value and prize most challenged. So the work that all of us do is so very important, and I'm really glad you're here. I look forward to hearing your remarks, so welcome. I'm glad you made it safe and sound from Maine, and I'm going to turn this over to Ray Breyer, I think.
Oh, I think it's Amber. You're going to say something?
From the Vermont Library Association.
Thank you. So if you'll bear with me, I have some short, pretty short prepared remarks. I'll try not to read too closely from the sheet. But thank you for joining us tonight. Here at the 2014 edition of the John Swan Intellectual Freedom Lecture. And yeah, as Marty mentioned, we're doing it this year with the VLA and the Department of Libraries, which is, we're very happy to do that with. And for those of you who may not know, this is named after John Swan, who was the late director of libraries at Bennington, and I believe he's also a member of the ACLU board of directors. I mean, perhaps Alan, I don't know if you knew him.
I was before my time.
That was before your time. You did? Okay. So that was what I learned from someone else at the ACLU. I had not known that previously. And he was a strong voice for free speech and intellectual freedom. And so we've been putting on this lecture since 1992. And so Marty brought up the very high profile nature of many of the items that are frequently banned and challenged. Award-winning books and films, but it's not just intellectual freedom isn't just limited to those areas, even though that's certainly a high profile way in which challenges to intellectual freedom are made visible, and because intellectual freedom not only includes that, but just the idea that we should be able to believe and think and say what we like without fear of being unduly targeted or harassed. And while many of the technologies over time have changed, the issues remain the same. We may not have books being banned in Boston anymore, but we do have library filtering software may prevent the public from accessing valid medical information, and whereas we also don't, perhaps, at least maybe as far as we know, the FBI conducting sort of surveillance on civil rights leaders that we did in the 1960s. We do have the NSA and its domestic surveillance programs, which are, the debate on that is ongoing to this day. And whereas this battle for intellectual freedom is never won or lost. The fight goes on, and the best tools that the public can have are information and participation. And because we need to be informed about these issues, but also when challenges and threats arise, people need to stand up and speak and fight back against these sorts of limitations on people's ability to see and speak and read what they like. And so in this arena of conflict between on the front of intellectual freedom, some of us have bigger microphones to wield than others, and tonight we have with us someone who has one of those larger microphones, Dr. John Sova, She's hailing from Garfield, New Jersey, and she has a PhD from Drew University. She's published in the neighborhood of 20 books. Is that correct? 22 books, and a good half dozen dealing, on the topic of censorship, including the ones that we have up here that Marty brought down. And also, she's currently working on a book examining censorship in the 1950s and 1960s. And so we please welcome, join me in welcoming Dr. Dr. Sova to the state and to the stage.
Where do we begin? Most recently, my website, I put an article on there, From Sex to Surveillance. And it sounds silly until you realize that the idea of intellectual freedom today has taken on a different meaning. But it's the same sort of in the fact that the technology, as Reagan said, it's given people different tools with which to see what we're reading, what we're accessing, what we're viewing. But the same point exists, that it's an attempt to limit our freedom to read, to watch, to even speak. Before the Hayes office began rating and limiting viewing, there were unrated films. This is my book. I'm not going to read the books to you. They're out there. And then the ratings began to satisfy certain small groups. It was the censorship, if you will, of movies, to satisfy to keep the government from banning certain things or removing certain movies. Restrictions were adhered to. Now, with the books, well, we can go back and take a look at those. If you looked at the most recent ones, we have actually 25 or 30 more that are added to each one of those books. That's in the 3rd edition, and we're going to a 4th edition probably in the next year or so, because the challenges just continue. Books have been limited. Lady Charlie's may be the most famous of the 20th century. I think that was the original mommy porn. I mean, if you talk about 50 Shades of Grey, 50 Shades of Grey made it through to publication and to bestsellerdom, and yet it's outrageously more sexual, if you will, outrageously more interesting, if you will, than Lady Chatterley's Lover. But the times were different, the feeling is different, the observations are different that are made by various people. Let's go back to sex, because that's where it really all began. The ALA has that on its website. The fight for intellectual freedom started with books. Okay, started with concerns of sexuality, but religious, political, social concerns, the obscenity, if you will. Obscenity could be someone saying, "Oh God," and I've just blasphemed. The aspect of a political unpopularity or lack of popularity in a political sense, because I don't like your politics. Maybe the book that you've written, I don't know you, but maybe the book that you've written or is popular in your group should be removed from the shelves. I'm jumping around here right now because before we get into that whole stream of thought, during World War I, a book written about World War I rather was banned during World War II by our military. Anyone know the name of it?
Johnny Got His Gun?
No. That was removed from books access points rather for military readers. But the one that was banned.
All Quiet on the Western Front?
All Quiet on the Western Front. Why?
Anti-war.
Well, what it does. Any idea? Yes.
Oh, no, I was agreeing with him because it's anti-war.
Well, it's not necessarily, it's not blatantly anti-war. How does it show that? How does it exhibit an anti-war feeling? It actually recounts, in part of it, a true incident in which the troops on both sides of the barbed wire put down their guns for Christmas, and they traded gifts, and they sang Christmas carols in German and in English. And then the next morning, they were back on the field and they had to do their job. Now, maybe it is anti-war, but it was taken out of military libraries. It was banned from sale on military bases and overseas because it would influence troops. See the people on the other side as they are. Okay. That's one of my most, I like to give this example out of the way because it's one of those examples where I like this, but I don't like that. I like humanizing things, but I don't like it if you make it too human because what you've done is then you're influencing people who might otherwise go to war. Let's go back now to plays from the beginning, books, films. Most of what is considered worthy of challenge is something you don't like, but I like. Or I like, you, and I don't want you to like as well. It's changed over time. Sex was very, very popular as a means for banning books. Certainly religion, Areopagitica by John Milton was taken out of libraries, was taken off shelves because of the religious aspect of it. Political treatises, of course, would be a problem. Political plays, plays that show, or certain religions. Mae West, back in the 30s, pulled off the stage, or at least some of her lines censored. She was asked more than once to rewrite things, and she went on until she got on stage, and then she was out of that theater, moved on someplace else. Why are we so? Why is that the case? Why is there a concern of sexuality, social, which is usually defined as the vulgarity, obscenities, things of that, that language that I shouldn't use, you shouldn't use. How has that changed, though? I think that's something else we have to, I'd like to, look at along the line there. We have the early reasons for banning books. We have the later reasons as the obscenity has changed. Obscenity today has become depiction of mommy has, or Heather has two mommies. Daddy's roommate. These are all books about either same-sex relationships. Why are people so afraid of anything of that sort? That is unusual in their so-called worlds. Where do you believe most of the bannings occur, or the challenges occur? I know you do Q&A later, but have an idea? Schools and public libraries. I mean, as regions of the country. Nobody's.
I would say the South.
Yes, it is. You're right. It's the South, and Texas is a big one. You'll again. I'm not reading my books to you, but synthesizing this. Texas is so powerful. The book depository situations that it can command Scott Forsman to create a textbook that specifically is made for Texans, and they buy so many thousands and millions of books over time. Nobody's getting naked in the books, and nobody cared to. But Mickey Mouse in his sorcerer's apprentice costume, taken out of the book. Why? Magic. Magic equal the occult equals Satan. Okay. All right. But there's the South. But there are cases you yourselves have dealt with the challenges. I know I've read about the VLA and have gone to the forefront. You've helped people, librarians who have had to face situations where someone comes in and says, I want that book off the shelf. Or today, of course, we'll talk about the Patriot Act in a little bit. But over the years, it was, I want the book off the shelf. Why? Because I don't want my child reading it. I want it behind the desk. Now, my own experience with censorship started very, very long ago. My parents can censor me. I feel parents have the right to control their child's environment, by the way. I don't think people, I know as part of the child's right to read, the ALA's child's right to read a doctrine or a document, rather, children should be free to take out whatever they'd like to from the library, but I think parents should censor. We'll start that. But I think of Miss Olga Katz, who was the librarian for, I think she must have been 100 years when I was there. She was 50 years, I believe, actually she was 50 years in the public library. And we would have to do, well, reports, on maybe the Greco-Roman era, go in to take out the books. Couldn't take them out, they're all reference, of course. They were the very large gift book, they were tabled books, if you would call them, with the photographs of statues with naked genitalia. Okay. So Miss Katz protected us. She would look first of all, who's giving this assignment that you have to do a report on, Greek, whatever era, or Roman era. Mr. So-and-so, Mr. Source, okay. And what does your report do? Okay. And then she would take the books, they were not on the shelves as reference books, they were under the front desk. Take it out there, you open it up there and there's masking tape. Masking tape across the Venus de Milo's breast. Masking tape across the different areas. And
And then she said, and I want you to sit at the table. And it wasn't because I was a nasty little girl. It was every one of us got the same thing, okay? And I want you to sit at that table where I can see you, and don't try pulling up the masking tape. Can you imagine doing this today? Can you imagine even thinking that way? That was my first, I wasn't offended by it. I was 10 years old. I figured, okay, that's what she did. Now, on the other hand, my parents were very strict about things. They censored what I read, what I did, whatever else. But my mother's view of what was appropriate definitely changed. She was not one of those who would have read the mommy porn, or as I refer to Lady Charlie's Lover. I remember Lady Charlie's Lover, I think I was in 5th grade. Or I was precocious, but one of the moms apparently had sneaked the book into the country. You knew how to sneak it into the country in the 50s, okay? It couldn't be brought in, customs would confiscate. So they would sneak it into, one of the girls brought it into the classroom, were giggling over, giving all of them there. And I didn't mention to my mom. My mom got wind of it, and as she usually did, why didn't you tell me? I don't tell you. What did I tell you? I'm going to tell you I'm reading whatever this is we're reading that sounds so funny. Okay, because you're 10, you kind of know things you don't know very much. All right. Now let's fast forward to the Star Report in the 90s. My mother's already in her 80s, and she said, they're putting that whole report on the internet. Can you download it? Can you print it out for me? She said, but don't print all 400 pages, just the stuff about. So her view of, I guess it changed because I was grown up too, but it's funny how, the changing perception there. So I got all just the stuff about that. And she did say, and I have to tell you that she was aghast. She was shocked, but she read the whole darn thing. We didn't discuss it though, because I was, even though I was an adult there, she said, oh, it's horrible. Did you finish the whole thing? Yes. It could have been too horrible. All right, now let's go back here now. What is it that, what triggers different concerns? New movie, Wolf of Wall Street. I haven't seen it, seen previews, I've read about it. 2 different individuals I've talked with about the movie in the past, actually about 2 weeks. One of the individuals mentioned that there was an abundance of sex in there. Gay sex, oral sex, this sex, that sex. Fine. I said, how could, something about the movie, that it seemed in a feature film, what was the rating? I haven't even checked the rating on it. If anyone knows, I don't know if it's R17 or NC-17 rather. Might be.
It's just R.
Just R, okay. All right, now, on the other hand, I spoke to someone else the other day, and it might be because he writes short stories, maybe it's a creative bent, I don't know what it might be, but we did talk about Jordan Belfort and about the whole 90s scene in the New York area. And he said the movie was very disturbing, and I thought he would say because of the sexuality. Didn't even mention, he was very disturbed because Jordan Belfort's motivations were never fully explained, why, and the source of his enough is never, too much is never enough. It should have been more of a cerebral approach to it, provide completely different look at it. And he said, I think the movie is inadequate because it doesn't fully explain the character's motivations or where it all came from. Boom. Here. So if you're going to take that movie out of the theater, on his part, he said it wasn't adequate for that reason. Someone else didn't say, neither said this movie should be banned, but both found it inadequate in certain ways, which is pretty much the way things happen with our lives as far as, or your lives as people who are involved with either defending civil rights, defending the rights of people to intellectual freedom, rather, whether as librarians or as attorneys, and even teachers. I've spent many years teaching. Did 10 years, 10 years full-time at the high school level, and 28 part-time at the college level as an adjunct instructor. And I've had multiple experiences where I always felt when we read Brave New World, which has been banned multiple times, I had students who didn't even read Brave New World. I mean, they weren't even reading it. I had to point out to one, he said something about he couldn't answer the questions because the reading was too hard. I said, so you missed the orgy on page 43. There's an orgy in there? Yes, orgy it's called. How can I miss that? So he read those things. That chapter he read. Good, we got him to read that. On the other hand, my former superintendent, I had been the head writer of the English department when that book was put on the reading list maybe 20 years previous to that time. And occasionally I'd have parents who complained to me. And I said, well, you have to see Mr. So-and-so. the superintendent, because he's kept it on the list all these years. He was the one who chose it. What's your objection to it? Well, the objection sometimes was, you have to really read it, to find the sex in there, but still there's a measure of sexuality. Some were disturbed by the fact of the crematoriums, that at the age of 60 or so, people just disappear and they become smoke and chemicals, because at 60 you no longer are functioning for the greater good of the society, the consumer society. Others were disturbed by the fact that it showed a totalitarian existence. It showed the government as being overbearing and peeking into everyone's lives. Now, this is 15 years ago. Okay. Now, the Big Brother was watching. Of course, it's Orwellian, but I'm mixing my authors here. But someone finds something objectionable in everything. Little Red Riding Hood has gotten into trouble. Yes, she has. Because in some of those southern towns you're talking about there's an objection to the fact that she got a bottle of wine hanging out of her basket when she goes to visit grandma. The wine goes with the cheese and the grapes and whatever else she takes there. And it's amazing that the book, parents had asked that it be removed from first grade, second grade reading carols, because it presents it encourages alcoholism, which is the most blatant discussion. I think one of those most horrifying. It doesn't. I can accept that people will be disturbed by Madonna's sex, not by her, but her book sex. I mean, the libraries carried it. Definitely they carried it. Did they have Miss Katz was gone by then, so it wasn't behind the library shelves, but it was on a restricted shelf. It was a little higher so that the little guys couldn't reach it. It was in the adult section. It doesn't keep people from going to the adult section. But I think the most horrifying wasn't the sex, wasn't the obscenity. I think what I'm most horrified about is something that did occur in Texas. Two fathers went to the first grade teacher and threatened her job. One was on the Board of Ed, by the way, because she had Jack and the Beanstalk in the reading bookcase for the little kids. Now, what's wrong with Jack and the Beanstalk? None of the characters utters an obscenity in even the lightest sense of the word. No. There's no politicism there, no religious angle there, and definitely no sex. But the problem is, Jack does that no matter why. He climbs up the beanstalk, he slays the dragon, then he steals the dragon's money and goes floating back down again, chops down the beanstalk. In some cases, he doesn't slay the dragon, he just kills the giant when he chops down the beanstalk. Fathers were concerned because the authoritarian figure is the giant, and he is being killed or destroyed or fooled by this child, and it upsets the balance in the house. It upsets the balance of the nuclear family. That the child would be encouraged by reading books of this sort. Okay, I know it's a silly example, but it's silly to me. It was serious to that teacher. And it was serious because she had to take the book out of her reading carol because she had a Board of Ed member who was complaining. Now, when you look at your own readings, you probably have, and I have my little button for my big button that says, I read banned books. I do. And many more than those, and many more than we're used to. I mean, you look at what the many reasons. You look at authoritarianism is a problem. Why is Catching the Rye continue? Well, of course, you have an adolescent who's thinking about sex. Adolescents don't think about sex. How could they? How could it be true? Parents were concerned about that. But there's also the angle that Catching the Rye has been banned for many reasons, or censored, or challenged. It's not only the idea of the sexuality; it's the idea that, God forbid, Holden Caulfield does curse every once in a while, quite a bit in the book. So we have that second type of challenge. Third challenge, teachers have asked to have it taken out of the classroom, to remove it from the reading list. Why? I think it's a great book that really explains adolescence. I have a son who's 37. Okay, he was a young male adolescent at one point. He's still a young male. He doesn't think he is, but so that I think that Holden is acting quite normal. The problem that teachers have asked to have it taken out of the classrooms, they're concerned that it shows the undermining of authority. You have to really lack confidence if you feel that that book is going to undermine your authority in the classroom. But teachers have also, and I consider, I haven't been a teacher, still a teacher in my mind. It's supposed to provide an encouragement of freedom to read, to think, to extend your intellectual growth. Now, but I'm trying to think of a book that hasn't had some sort of backlash. The Bible. I'm told so many people, I mean, if you take the Bible in total, all right, it's contradictory. I've read it, the Bible as literature. There's a lot of begetting and begotten there, and he and a she, as I've heard people say. Yes, there is. And it's religious, because the religious part of it actually has been the reason why it's been pulled out of libraries, or it has been, people have said, put it on a restricted shelf because we don't want everyone to have access to it. My children don't do that. If you're agnostic or an atheist, possibly, you may feel offended, or a person may feel offended, but is that something that should be your choice or my choice? No. You know, I think when I look at the development over time, many different reasons that, you know, we've gone through social reasons for the banning of films, books, and plays. We've gone through the sexual reasons for those, the religious reasons, political reasons. Times change, the periods changed, and during a highly political period, or a period of tense, let's say a period of war, or a period of revolution, and maybe social revolution, different books take on different meanings. Today we're in a period in which the largest number of books that are challenged each year have to do with interpersonal relationships. Has anyone read Tango Makes Three?
Yeah.
You have?
The
All right,
penguin.
okay. The penguins, right, the two male penguins who, well, actually it's based on a true story in Central Park, the Central Park Zoo. Two male penguins saw female penguins nurturing an egg until it hatched, and they took on a stone. And the zookeeper was so taken by the idea that they were trying to make the stone hatch, if you will, that he found a fertilized egg. I guess that was an extra egg. I'm not sure the actual story, but he placed it with the two male penguins, and when the egg hatched, they named the little one Tango, and Tango Makes Three. And that's partially a true story, partially, of course, this lovely illustration there, but that book has caused such controversy. And Daddy's Roommate caused such controversy. Children don't seem to see the problem. Adults seem to see the problem. Promoting, and you want to fill in the blanks on there, because the language that's used in and deviant behavior, promoting homosexuality, promoting antisocial behavior. Sometimes it has nothing to do with the same-sex aspect. It's disrupting the nuclear family. Once again, here we are. We're back to disrupting that nuclear family. If it's so easily disrupted, it's like I always think about when I was divorced at when my son was very young, and let's say I've been divorced 33 years. Okay, not that I want a badge, but there was a point to this. When we went before the judge, and I wanted my name returned to me. Sova was my family name. I wanted to return to me, and I know I have a son who would have a different last name. And I guess the judge could say this in 1980. They looked at me and said, if we divorce is final, I raised my hand, and my name change? And he said, do you realize that you have a son who is going to grow up then with a name different from yours? Do you really want to impact his world in a negative manner as that will? No, it will. And I looked at him and I said, if I raise a child with so little confidence that a difference in last names is going to make the difference, I'm going to fail anyway. So the divorce granted, okay, it's that. But that was, you look back 35 years or 34 years and think, oh God. Now, do we look back 34 years, 35 years, and say the same thing about intellectual freedom? If you are library directors or actually active librarians, you are, okay. Do you have filters on your computers?
No.
Okay. Is that because it's Vermont? Do you think?
Most of the libraries have their own policy,
Their own,
and we decided not to. A lot of the libraries have their own policy.
Okay.
And
So it's an individual choice. It's not you're not required to.
no,
Okay, by your.
it's strongly suggested not to have filters by ALA and VLA, but it is an individual choice per library.
Because now does your library have filters?
We do for
Software?
children,
For children.
just on pornography, but it's worthless.
Mhm.
I've told my trustees that.
I'm not trying to put you on the spot, just because I find it interesting that, again, North Jersey, the library, my home library, has the filtering software. And they really don't want to have the filtering software, but then again, it's miscast all over again, they're going to watch, as children will do. They get to, I got into the site, and honestly, innocently, although I sound like I do research everything. I was the most fun for my library director, because the kinds of outrageous stuff that would come through because of these books, Unforbidden Place. I mean, all the background research and a few other things I did, Encyclopedia of Mistresses and some other things that, brought in information that was interesting. Patrons didn't even know it was out there, so they weren't looking for it, but I was, so it came in there. But I found that, well, of course, now once we have internet availability, I can order online, and it's not as much fun. I don't go in and shop and I need such and such book. I order them. Let's go back to the idea of the filtering. You have filtered over the years. Perhaps, maybe you haven't. Maybe you have. Some public libraries, school libraries have less freedom. Public libraries will say, well, we've chosen not to order it because it's going to be a problem in that library. Even self-selection, you might say. Okay. Might also choose to not order something because it will be hard to keep from being stolen. Some books just disappear because they're just so much fun for people to take. The idea of the self-selection, the idea that the internet brings up different issues. I mean, books, you can work with the films, you can work with audios, any of those takes. But how do you stop someone? What do you do when something is something inappropriate at your computer station? What do you do?
It's in our policy that, first of all, they're very open right now. We're considering filters on the screen. But it is in our policy that if somebody is looking at something that's objectionable to the person next to them, and the person next to them complains, then we can kind of quietly say, we're a public library, people are walking back and forth around you, and to be considerate of what other people are having to look at. And that's been awkward, so there is discussion about putting something on those screens so that just the person in front of it at that level can actually see. So we're playing with that a little bit. But trying not to restrict.
It's difficult. It's a difficult situation to be in because you don't want to be. I did say, I forget to mention Amber at the beginning, that sometimes you have, we have personal views that conflict with what our professional needs happen to be. And the professional need is to provide information, to permit, or to be as free as you can intellectually. Personally, you may have a different opinion, but you can't. I couldn't express mine in the classroom because it's not the right thing to do. And as someone who's involved with intellectual freedom, with what's at the library there, you're not going to. You don't have the right. You may have personal views that are different, but you have to uphold certain policies. I would say that's very much like in many other organizations where you have to deal with a greater number of people. It might be the military. The military doesn't agree. The individual commanding officer may not agree with certain policies, but it's the law. It's the military law, so it's the law of the land. You do follow because you have to. You have to uphold what you've promised to uphold. Now, I want to go back to why I mentioned the filtering there. Very innocently, honest to goodness, it was very innocently. There's a great site called bookfinder.com. If I want to find which books are, if I'm looking for something not necessarily on Amazon, it actually filters through and tells me if Abe Books has it, Libris has my book, and what price, and it's wonderful. Except if you put an S at the end of Finder, at least 3 years ago, and then up pops this screen with voluptuous ladies and gentlemen and all sorts of sexual activity. I'm looking at this. Good thing I did this at home. Now I've tainted my computer forever, but that's okay. Bookfinders.com is not the same as bookfinder.com. And sometimes mistakes will happen in any situation. I mean, for a while there, whitehouse.com
instead of whitehouse.gov was a site to people going to, you put .com immediately, but of course whitehouse.gov was the government, whitehouse.com was a pay per minute or whatever it might be, site just like my bookfinders.com turned out to be. Okay, now, how do we get to this? How do we get to a point where what you look at on screen, what you say on the telephone, what you Google becomes someone else's business? It's not anybody else's business when I take out a library, but I make a big point of it when I did take out things out of the library because my people, as I might say, just enjoyed it so much of the outrageous stuff I'd order. But if I wanted something quiet, I expect my library director or the librarian at the desk to be as confidential as a doctor. It's nobody's business that if I'm looking up something, I don't want someone to worry about my health if I'm looking up something on or ordering books or whatever, other media that has to do with certain health issues. The same, it's a matter of privacy, a matter of, what's important to me should not necessarily be your business. Now, I don't know how many of you have run into the problem where your records have been asked for, but can't get to that with the Patriot Act. I have a very close friend who's a library director in Jersey. In fact, she just retired. She was it was in 2006, 2004 rather. One of her patrons apparently she wasn't sure, but she was told had threatened a child. And so local law enforcement came in and they asked Michelle to turn over his library records. They wanted to see what he'd been ordering that might be related to. And they used the Patriot Act as their reason. So she said, you have to have a subpoena. Do it the right way, you have to have a subpoena. So she received a call from the town mayor, a couple of councilmen, Hasbrook Heights, New Jersey, by the way. And she was told that there should be no need for a subpoena. This is simply just a casual, informal look at his library record. And she said no. And she did contact the ACLU. She did have an attorney. She ended up she eventually was forced to resign her position but she immediately was picked up within weeks by the Rockaway Township Library, a larger library that was ready for a new director. They admired her guts. They admired the fact she stood her ground. But if you can look up the case of Michelle Rudy, R-E-U-T-T-Y, if you're curious. But it was used as a cover. We just want to do a little exploratory here because we're not really sure. We want to see if his library, his reading tastes would support a possible charge of having threatened a child. Now, I don't see the connection. I see a connection, and I can see where, yes, if he's taking out books about child abuse, perhaps, or sexual abuse, or perhaps that they may see a connection. They're seeing, that 6 degrees of separation there, but they don't have the right to do. They didn't have the right to do that. And she was made uncomfortable, but she's a fighter, so to the point she was uncomfortable, and then she was ready to move on. She had already done her exploration. It dragged on for 2 years, the whole situation. The VLA has stood behind it, and people have had problems. I know because Chris Feynman, who was the 2011 John Swan Intellectual Freedom Lecture, I think Chapter 9 is devoted to, a big part of it is to the VLA's fights. So this is not a new story now. What's new is that it gets harder and harder as pressure is put on from different organizations and different powers above to be able to stand your ground. You can take a book off the shelf. You can hand a book to someone else. You can say, we've ordered this. It's always part of the collection. You could also say, my patrons' records are confidential. Get me a subpoena. But sometimes it's very hard if you've got the mayor breathing down your neck. Now,
And just to note that in Vermont, those records are protected by law, so the confidentiality of library records.
yes, and they are in New Jersey as well. But again, just as a favor this time, not you, I'm not saying, but that's used in many situations. Let's not make a big deal of this. Let's make it informal. No. Because every time you make it informal, there's more etching, it's chiseling away at freedoms. It's not just etching at it, it's chiseling away at freedoms. Now, books, media, all sorts of media. Is surveillance today, or the surveillance we believe, I hope someone's listening to some of my conversations that I have, because we've had some humdingers recently with someone else and I. We've been talking about another book that I wanted to do and certain things that were occurring in the 50s and 60s and all that. So every once in a while I will say, and I have to admit, I tell the lady with who I speak, say, hey, are you listening, NSA? I hope so. I doubt it. I'm not on their radar by any means, I would think. But, and of course, it's billions of calls that they're monitoring every day, and I know that supposedly they only are kept for a few hours or whatever it might be, 48 hours or 24 hours, whatever little blips they have. It's very difficult to condemn the surveillance, and it's at the same time very difficult to support the surveillance. The reasons for the surveillance: to protect the United States, to find those sleeper cells that might exist in the United States, which to me sounds like racial profiling, possibly religious profiling, if I look at it from the one standpoint. On the other hand, if anyone lost anyone who lost anyone, or knows someone who lost someone in 2001 Trade Tower attacks, I was in court that day. A simple matter. I was there to support my mother. She was there because the house that my sister had taken all the grass out. It's Garfield, New Jersey. It's not urban, but it's the transitional town, which means that we have small yards, okay? 65 feet frontage is considered massive, to put it in perspective. My sister had all the grass taken out of front of the yard there, had asphalt put down. Didn't realize that the contractor who did all the work for whatever ton of money hadn't gotten a permit. So we were in front of a judge who happened to be an old school friend of mine when the trade towers were hit. And he came to the courtroom, and several leading people worked in the city, over 15 miles from the city there. So when on the one hand, I think whoever did it really has to be punished, and we should keep people from ever doing this again. So if you can get any information in advance, it's very, very important. On the other hand, I don't like the idea that conversations are being listened into. I don't like the fact that possibly whatever I'm reading, or not reading, what I'm looking at online is being documented. It's a perspective, once again. It's a perspective. I don't like it. I think it's an intrusion on freedom. On the other hand, I wouldn't like to lose more people, not the ones I've done, 2 that died. Now, how do you bridge that gap? How do you create a balance there? That's the area of intellectual freedom. I think we're heading to this at this point now. I do worry about the fact that Google has, if I go into Google, they want to know are you looking at such and such? Would you like to go to Boca? Because I was checking something else there. So they know what I do. They know what I'm, they know I've been sleeping. They know when I'm awake. They know if I've been bad or good. So I just keep on, whatever I have to do with it. My son just got me a wonderful little, not the netbook, it's like a Chromebook, but through Verizon Wireless. And the first thing that I just noticed, I happened to click off, I didn't want something else, and it shows up there anyway. She looked at this 2 days ago. I don't want this. I don't want to touch me. I don't want to look at this anymore. But I know that I can control that. I can shut down that Chromebook and use my laptop and use my incognito or use Firefox. But I can't stop my cell signals from going different places. Now, I don't fit most of the I'm a 64-year-old woman, Caucasian woman, middle class. So I don't fit most of the profile. I'm not what might be a terrorist possibility. Except when you get me behind the wheel on a main highway, and I try to apply New Jersey rules. New Jersey rules on a main highway are, if you're driving as fast as the second fastest car, you're not going to be clipped. They will take the first fastest car. Maine, they don't care. They call ahead and they'll line people up 7 in a row there. So that profile I fit. That I've already gotten 2 tickets, $185 each. It's ridiculous, but that's within 2 years, 3 years. But so I don't fit in any profile groups now. Is it ever right to do surveillance? Is it ever right to? Are we in a state of war? We're concerned about that. No. Well, yes, in a way we are, and in a way we're not. But who are we looking at? Is it right to? You are an assistant director of the ACLU. Is there ever a situation in which the ACLU would say surveillance in this case? I don't want to put you on the spot, it's I have some here as well.
I'm Alan Gilbert, I'm the executive director. I
Yes.
think actually you're missing the point.
That's why I'm asking you.
You're being cheated as a citizen because the kind of surveillance that's been done has not been effective. Instead, what we've had is security theater for the last dozen years to make us think that the government's protecting us. But if you look at the record of the NSA surveillance involving phone metadata, there's maybe one case that possibly it was useful. But other than that, it's been a total failure. And we should be upset about that first, to my mind. If you're really concerned about keeping people safe, you will not be in favor of the surveillance that we've had.
We have very few other options, though, do we?
No,
I mean,
we
you
do.
listen to solve it.
No, we do, because the things that work are gumshoe police work, or actually it's citizens who, on an airplane where there's an incident, stand up and take charge of things.
Very true.
It's really not the high-tech stuff that we're investing so much money in and so much national attention. It just isn't effective.
Then why does it, is it so well, let's say, why is it so broadly discussed? Because we're showing that we're trying to do something.
Yeah.
And I'm using the word trying.
Yeah, we had a conference on surveillance this fall because we looked at surveillance in Vermont to see what was happening here. And if you read things by Andrea, I just forgot the name of the person who spoke at our.
Bruce Schneider?
No.
Oh,
The Washington Post guy who lives in Pomfret, Vermont.
yeah,
William Arkin.
thank you.
William Arkin, with Dana Priest back about 4 years ago for the Post, did a whole series on the development of the surveillance establishment in this state and in this country. And what's really happened with surveillance is what happened with the military back in the 1950s and what Eisenhower warned about. We have become a government that is now beholden to an industry that is itself profiting off the kinds of fear that it subjects us to.
Now, do you see it as an intellectual freedom issue, though?
Well, you know, as you've been talking, I've been asking myself, what does intellectual freedom really mean? Because I don't know if I know that anymore. I'm not sure what the freedom, I'm really not, to me, intellectual freedom is so many freedoms that it doesn't by itself have much of a meaning. I mean, it's artistic freedom, it's musical freedom, it's freedom of speech, of press. It's
Now,
just.
the ALA defines it as the right to acquire any information that you desire to, and the right to information, an open, it's on their page, an open acquisition of information. And I don't see surveillance as an intellectual freedom issue. I brought it up because it keeps up, they throw it into the pot. People keep throwing it into the pot because it's not freedom from, I'm not being impeded in my acquisition of information.
Well, I think you might be and you don't know it.
By
Well,
these-
there's some people who will not do certain things because they feel a chilling of their rights just in case what they're doing is being recorded.
Michael Foucault's panopticon idea.
Mhm.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's sort of a self-censorship, if you will.
Mhm.
It's a pulling back. And there is more and more. I mean, I know that I self-censor my own emails because I do not want to put in an email something that could harm other people or myself if somebody I don't want to get it would see it.
Well, many people wisely also will remind anything they forward, please remove everything, any identifiers if you're forwarding this particular email onto others.
Yeah, I'm not sure how many people would actually do
Right.
that.
Unfortunately, the forwards I receive sometimes, though, there are several people, but suddenly they're friends, old friends, but I can see the laundry list of emails of all the people that have been forwarded. I'm very cautious about removing. I used to tell when I entered teaching 2001, so I left, but by then we were already using email quite a bit, and I used to tell my students, don't put anything in an email that you wouldn't want your worst enemy to see. And I'd say it teasingly, but I also meant it because of my own, same thing. I self-censor, but I am questioning the idea of intellectual freedom. What you said, what it really means. It's supposedly acquisition of information. Now, I do watch myself. Now, actually, I don't. But I don't want Google to have to contact me with to sell me things. But my computer is so badly tainted with all the things. I have to look up for all of my. If someone to say this woman, I mean, what does she do with her time? What is she reading? Well, I'm reading. I tell you, I wish I were E.L. James. I really wish I were her. She was this very smart lady. She started with putting her book chapters on the internet, and that's how she finally captured a contract. But no, I do. You're right. Self-censorship. I would say then, that. All right, that is a limitation then. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's one of the biggest dangers to our lives right now, because I think we're all beginning to fall into it, and we rationalize why we're doing it, and we don't think it's a big idea. It's sort of what you were saying. It's okay, we'll do it informally. We're not setting a principle here. We're not changing anything. And the fact of the matter is we are.
I think if you even faintly suspect that the government could see your library records, it might change what you would want to read or check
Very
out from the
true.
library.
Yeah.
Very true. And the government can, though, they subpoena. But you have to have a strong reason for it to get a subpoena from the government. It's not simple. It's like when Michelle stood her ground, they eventually did get the subpoena because they were able to bring in at least testimony from someone else that there were threats made, and this is just for a child, for the sake of the child's life. But I think the struggle when I had to, when I was trying to put together, what would I do here other than read my books to you, if you will? And I didn't want to read my books to you, if you will, because you can read them yourself. And the word surveillance came up, and I liked the idea, but I didn't know how to put that in the context of intellectual freedom. I know I have limitations on myself. I know with my friends, I don't say certain things on the phone. I'll be outrageous, and I'll say, listen to that, and I'll say or something. But there are some. I'm a public-private person, if you will, or a private-public person. Some things are just out there about me, about my writing and about my life. But if I feel uncomfortable, I've always felt uncomfortable on the phone, though, even before we've talked about, the possibility of the government listening to us. My mother was that way too. I bring her up there. She said, "Come over and tell me what you have to tell me. Don't talk on the phone. You never know who's listening."
But can I just ask
Sure.
you or you? So
It's a team effort, really.
right. I wasn't under the impression. I'm not in favor of this, trust me, but I've read about it, and they say that they're not actually listening to you. So are they listening to you or not listening to you?
No, they're not. The only times they are is when they have reasonable suspicion grounds to think you're involved in terrorist activity. And then they've gone, supposedly, to the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court, and they've gotten a warrant or a subpoena to listen to the conversation. So basically what they do is they're using this metadata, the record of the call, to maybe possibly develop the reasonable suspicion which they can then use to listen to the conversation. That's what we think is happening, because we don't really know.
That's the court that we don't really know.
That's
what's
the
happening in
secret
that
court that we don't know about, and it would be good if they would start publishing their opinions, and there would be a public advocate there and so forth.
Speaking of intellectual.
But here's, the most amazing statistic that I've come across in 2014 was in an article, it was an interview with Edward Snowden right at the New Year. And Snowden was trying to convey the amount of information the NSA is gathering, because he felt that people just had no concept of it. And so he figured that right now, every 14.4 minutes, the NSA is gathering the equivalent of a Library of Congress. Every 14.4 minutes. And that's 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. And that's,
But it's not being kept. Again, we go to the supposedly because we don't know.
No, actually, it is
It is
being
being
kept.
kept.
And that's why the big facility, the big
They're saving it
facility
because
info.
they haven't figured out how to use it.
That's the problem.
You chased it.
Here's another amazing statistic. This was my favorite from last year. In 1980, a gigabyte of memory cost $500,000. And in 2012, a gigabyte of memory cost a nickel.
Wow.
So if you think about what that means for storing the kinds of records that are being gathered, it's actually cheaper now to save stuff, save data, than it is to somehow sort through it and figure out a way to get rid of it, because it will take you more time and more money. So storage is no longer much of an issue. Maybe with photographs it still is, storing some video.
Is it
footage.
right to do surveillance of foreign powers then?
Could you explain what you mean by a right of surveillance? Do you
Whether is it right to listen in on, let's say, or gather information then on foreign powers? I mean, do we separate as only Americans? We don't want to see this, you know.
So are you saying, is it right or is it a right?
Do we find it acceptable? If it's, as long as it's them, not us. You know, I'm not asking you personally. I think that that's
Yeah.
something else that's come up in recent, you know, questions. The listening in on, if you will, on the German premier, listening in on French president. Of course, the French president's been very interesting lately to listen in on, I guess.
That strikes me as another sort of straw man argument where that question to me is not all that important. What's important is, why would you possibly do that? I mean, what a stupid tactical thing to have done. Even if you got good intelligence, how can, I don't think it's worth it. I mean, maybe if it had been Adolf Hitler and he was still in power, I would think, yeah, of course. But I mean, with someone like Angela Merkel, it just made no sense to me at all.
No, and that's been raised, that issue's been raised. I mean, maybe not our own people, but maybe we should be listening, we should be gathering data. But then again, as you said, there are other ways of gathering intelligence.
I think so, yeah.
Well, Senator Sanders brought up, are you listening to us, Congress?
Right, and they wouldn't really answer.
Yeah.
Answer.
And that was, and he's right to ask that question,
Yeah.
I think, because then the NSA actually could possibly have leverage over our elected officials.
Well, just like J.
That's
Edgar
dangerous.
Hoover, I think that's
Yeah.
really the question
Yeah.
he's asking. That's a good question.
And I would add, the only reason we know any of this stuff is because of Edward Snowden.
That's correct.
So before Edward Snowden has revealed these things, the government certainly wasn't volunteering any of this information. So I think you should take anything that the government says about what they are or are not doing with a healthy amount of skepticism.
In 2006, the ACLU got complaints from people because of the news stories that started to appear that the NSA was indeed collecting phone data. And so I remember opening up the phone book and finding out in front of the phone book there's a privacy policy. It says how the phone company treats your records. And we read this and we said, gee, what people are saying seems like a violation of this privacy policy. So we went to the Public Service Board and filed a complaint. And the Public Service Board agreed to take it up. And before the proceedings could begin, the U.S. government went to U.S. District Court in Burlington and claimed state secrets and got an order shutting down the investigation. So we then appealed that order. It was eventually consolidated with some other cases, and they were eventually vacated because Congress in 2008 absolved the telecoms of any liability because of this. And it actually, Congress shut down all the investigations. And I remember thinking at the time, eventually, we're going to find out about this. You know, when's it going to happen? And 5 years later, there it is. You know, there's Edward Snowden doing exactly what we were trying to do, being nice about it and being legal. And he got as frustrated as everybody else and finally just blew the whistle.
We're the same society, though, that screams bloody murder if the next 9/11 happens and we find out that we could have known. I think, you know, on one hand, we don't want our rights violated, but, you know,
But that's,
we're okay that we want their rights to be violated, not our rights.
We want the right people's rights to be violated.
Exactly.
well, that's
How
what
do
I
you
was saying
choose
before. It
that?
depends on where your interests happen to, or your concerns are. And it's difficult, that's a very difficult balance.
Well, but I would
Well,
argue that's why we have the legal system.
Yeah, I would
I
agree
really
with
do
that
think
too.
the
yeah.
legal system is trying to get to that very question. How do we get the right people who are trying to wrong us?
That happened in Randolph when the police wanted to get to the records of the man that eventually they were able to pinpoint him killing his niece. But when the library refused to let them look at his records, or no, it was hers, look at hers, what she had been looking at the internet and used me because they wanted to see who she might have been talking to on the internet to see who might want to harm her. But the people, letters to the editor and such not, they were furious that the library wouldn't help the police investigation without a subpoena. So that's something libraries actually have to deal with, is the public perception. They don't want their own records to be looked at, but if, you know, why wouldn't you have done that for these policemen?
And that, well, that is, again, balancing your rights or their rights, let's say, against what has been later proven to be a monster.
But if I remember, those records were surrendered as soon as the police got a warrant.
Yes.
And-
You have
They have to go legal route. though.
Right, but
Like you've said, though, it's the legal system working its
Right.
way through.
And in this
Like-
state now, you can actually get a warrant by email. It is really easy to get a warrant. It's just asking people to go through the formal review process, just in case, have one person check out their request. And it's really, it doesn't take much time, but you'd think it's the hardest thing in the world. Police complain about it, and it's really not that big of a deal.
And it does go back to where your interests lie. Again, before, we said, we talked about surveillance. Is it, do we have, we pinpointed a certain group? I mean, I'm from a state in which the state troopers were charged with racial profiling about
Right.
2 decades ago, a decade and a half ago.
You were under a court order for a while, I think, to collect data
In
and do
North
the
Jersey.
analysis.
Oh, yes, oh, yes. And you know, was it racial profiling, or does it just happen to be middle-aged white women who were riding down the road too fast? No, it's hard to, it really is a difficult situation to balance the needs of people and to balance the concerns of people. And going back to what you said about the case in Rambo, we have to go with the legal aspect, though. You get the warrant, get the subpoena for the records. You can't have that informal, do it as a favor for me because I don't really, you know, it can be couched in other terms. Do it as a favor for me because I really don't want to have this guy, give this guy a problem if he hasn't been creating a problem. So let's just see the records. No, you can't. You know, if there's a cause for suspicion or a reason for suspicion, go the legal route. But no, it's. I think for me, it's very difficult to decide. Not that I have any power over NSA or the USA or anything else in any other way, whether or not do I really want to have that possible security, even if it's a false security that, you know, maybe we are watching certain individuals or certain groups that have shown themselves to be dangerous to the United States. If they have, then perhaps maybe there should be other means, like you said, gumshoe work, you know, going off and, okay, we've identified A, B, C, and D, let's go after them. Let's really put it out in the open if we can. But I'm very weak in the area of the surveillance because I don't see it as, unless it's me that you're listening to, you're not, you know, impeding my intellectual freedom by, you know, listening to others. And it's the same feeling as you said before. Maybe maybe the community wouldn't like it if individuals in the community have their records, you know, or someone asked for their records, but they wanted that man or that young woman's records to be checked, so you could see what she was looking at, where she was headed, what she was fearful of, kind of thing. And I think that's what it comes down to. It started with books, as the ALA says on its intellectual freedom page. It started with books, and it's really, I mean, with the digital age, with the internet, it's very difficult to determine when someone's watching me. And that's why I do worry about what I don't mind researching anything about, you know, sex and social obscenity, but politics I'm a little itchy about, a little touchy about. I don't know if, you know, I'm going to offend somebody by saying something about somebody in power, or having looked at the wrong side, or just passed on a joke to the wrong person if it has to do with our president or my governor of the state of New Jersey. And Bridgegate, we're very proud, by the way. I'm sorry I pushed more of a Q&A almost into this latter part of it, but I really was pleased that you jumped in and, you know, and talked about surveillance and talked from the angle of, you know, from the legal aspect there, or, you know, a different angle than I thought. Because I come at this as definitely a theorist. Definitely a theorist. I'm still back in the books and the film and the plays and the internet, and, you know, and I'm not quite sure where I am with the when we go with the individual freedoms as far as my phone, my texting. My God, I don't know where the text, sometimes my texts don't reach somebody for hours because of where I might be sending, from where I'm sending. I'm wondering what's happened to them in the meantime. Who took them first and was reading them? So now, I'm even careful about my text messages. I'll be truthful about that.
Yeah.
Would you identify yourself, please?
Sure.
As you do speak, as you do,
Yeah,
of course, we know you.
I'm Tom McMurdo. I'm here at the Vermont Department of Libraries. I'm a librarian. I was thinking about intellectual freedom, and we were talking about what that means. And I read a headline, I think it was today or yesterday, where Obama said that we had a drone attack in Somalia on some people or somebody who's involved with Al-Shabaab, which is an Al-Qaeda affiliated terrorist group. And this has occurred to me before. And I feel like as a citizen that I should feel free to go to an Al-Shabaab website to see what it is that they're saying. But I won't do that.
Neither would I. No,
Because, I mean, I read recently about someone in another state who looked at some terrorist websites, very innocently, apparently, and the cops showed up and broke his store down and arrested him. And you think about how, I know that when I'm saying to myself, I should not go look at this website, that there's something wrong.
Right.
And that my intellectual freedom is being violated.
And if I, Tom, it's a great, actually had exactly the same experience. I'm thinking about the role of the librarian in ensuring that citizens have access to information, and there's a slippery slope that was introduced with the internet, because that puts librarians sometimes in a tough position. And I mean, you mentioned, Shari, having somebody sitting next to somebody that finds it objectionable. And the whole idea of community standards it can be a very dangerous place to go in a library. What's correct in my community to be looked at a terminal in a library, when the whole purpose of having that terminal is so that person has the access to the whole World Wide Web unfettered. It should be that way. And it does place librarians in a tough position sometimes, because you're going to hear from other citizens that may not be happy with that, but it's not like we used to be able to just choose books and they're on the shelf and the book didn't change. So the web is a much more difficult thing sometimes to support open access to.
Well, and now we've got the federal courts with net neutrality being overturned.
Right.
I mean,
yes.
It's just unbelievable. I mean, you might have to pay extra to go to that Al-Shabaab website, to have unfettered access.
Or you might have to pay extra to go to the library's website.
Yeah.
Because they're giving free information and they're not paying us enough money.
Yes, exactly.
That's horrible.
So that's a whole other layer on top of this.
Now, has anyone, I'm sure you all have heard of the Anarchist's Cookbook.
Oh, yeah.
For some time, Barnes & Noble was not permitted to sell that back in the 80s again. I tried to buy a copy. Not that I wanted to blow anything up, but it's because it was, it was taboo. So I tried to purchase them, tried to buy it at different places. Of course, it was before it's the 80s and the 90s, and now it's available. I can order it online if I want to. But I wouldn't.
Well, here's a story about the anarchist.
Please.
I worked at a library system in outside of Denver. One of our public libraries was next to Columbine High School when that whole horrible event happened. We had copies of the Anarchist Cookbook in our library collection, and my job was to answer intellectual freedom challenges, which was always interesting. And I got a call from a principal who found a copy of that book from our library in a student's locker. And that really raised a lot of issues for us. We got the book out, we all read it, discussed it, we got some citizens in, talked about it. We decided to keep the book in the library, but it really did. I mean, the whole atmosphere and the community at that time was very highly charged. People were really nervous. And it was a very thoughtful process that we went through, but in the end, that book stayed on the shelf. So you find yourself sometimes I mean, I've had other experiences where I've defended books that I really abhorred, but, you know, you
That's
find
what
yourself
to your professional
really
beliefs
kind
and
of
your professional requirements and your personal beliefs.
putting your own personal feelings aside, upholding something to be available for the public to see.
So I'm a retired now academic librarian, and I just can't imagine in an academic setting not being able to go to those websites and look at this. I mean, how do you teach if you can't go to these websites and understand what's going on? I just didn't, I hadn't thought about it. I just hadn't thought about it. I am retired, but still, and I'm a public library trustee now. I am appalled at the thought of
Be
that.
prepared for a visit. If you do go to the sites, I suppose.
For faculty not to be able to do that kind of research. I mean, that was always our point about filters and so on. You know, you can't filter those things. People have to do research on them.
And I mean, I taught argument persuasion and also at the college level. One of the phrases that my students who had one mindset, if you will, I said, the truly educated individual, truly prepared individual, will see both sides of the issue, even if he or she chooses only one side of the issue to support. And this goes back to what you were saying about the academic. Just because someone is accessing a site that is dangerous, has been designated as dangerous, and my little quotation marks here, but as dangerous. Somebody on the outside is looking at this should see that as an academic or an academician, maybe even Islamic studies, maybe he or she is examining a site or visiting a site, you know, to learn more about a topic, and now we feel prepared to have some look over his shoulder or her shoulder. It's a concern, a big concern. Now, how often does it happen? Probably too often. Like you said, you know, that sounds quite extreme. That the authorities must have had something else that they thought, mistakenly or not mistakenly, you know. But mistakes happen. Come on, how many times have drug enforcement officers kicked in the wrong door in New York City and shot people because they had false intelligence or bad intelligence, you know, bad information, wherever gathered. But no, that becomes, for me, it's not a career hazard, except if I'm inaccurate. I have to check my books and check my books and check my books. But you have to make split-second decisions sometimes if you're in a library. And sometimes in the classroom, even when I was in the classroom, talking about certain books, certain topics even. You know, can I impart that information? And I think it's becoming more and more of a concern, obviously, especially with people recording. Has anyone here had anyone record you while you were at the desk? Yeah.
Sometimes you don't know.
You don't know. Say you did say A, B, or C. That's how that happened. I had it happen in the classroom actually, and unfortunately, the parent came in complaining about the scarlet letter. Actually, the person came in. The parent came in. We were talking about the scarlet letter in class. It was an American literature class. The scarlet letter is not a young woman who has an affair. You all know the story with a minister who gives birth to a child, and raises that child Pearl, and later she makes peace with the minister. Well, I was talking about that, and one of my students recorded that. The parent came in angrily a couple of days later. Now, actually came to my superintendent. My superintendent said, "You've been talking about your personal life in the classroom." Now, at that point, my son was already a junior in high school. You were talking about your personal life in the classroom. How am I talking about my personal life in the classroom? He said, one of the parents claims to have a tape of you talking about having a child. I said, American. Could I guess which book this is? Could I guess it made my American Lit class, possibly? Well, I can't reveal that. Well, I'm being charged with something. I wasn't tenured at that point, and either way. Well, we did get down to it. Finally, I figured out which child it was. I went back into the superintendent. I said, we're doing the Scarlet Letter. Don't you know which class I'm reading? That's what it is. I said, my child is not a baby. I mean, it's not my personal life. But someone's got this a little bit skewed here. course, then the parent was upset because we were talking about pregnancy outside of marriage, which in that area never happened. A school district right between Passaic and Patterson, New Jersey, if you know anything about that, okay? Right, never happened in the 1990s, never. So, I mean, that recording, a silly thing like that, the child had actually edited things. I wasn't always the easiest person to teach as a teacher, but something like that, not that you would have that experience, but again, the question is, who's listening, who's watching, who really wants to hurt you as a professional? Do you really have to care? Yes, you do, unfortunately. Do you have to worry about the anarchist cookbook? Well, you stood, they stood strong, but by going through a good process, that was, you say the legal process, that's true. In a way, it was a legal process, or it was a process where it's a set policy. Most districts do have a policy, a book review policy. If they haven't, the first time they're challenged, they develop one very quickly. This is yours. This is yours right now as a group. So, if you have anything to share with each other, too.
I just wanted to go back briefly to the subject of pornography and the fact that our library doesn't, at this moment, have filters. That could change as board members change and different people come in and out. But I have to say that there have been times when I have stopped and thought about, in libraries' efforts to stay in the information avenue and to go forward with that and allow access, free access of information. But I've never known a library that had an adult film in the back or had pornography available for people who walk in the door. That was always a place where you go to a bookstore or a particular bookstore or a magazine bookstore, right? And so in our effort to become modern and allow and have internet access be one of, to go into that, because that's where we're going, is into technology. It is allowed because we don't, because we don't want to filter, but yet it is a whole different realm of what we've ever offered before in terms of pornography in libraries.
No,
I don't see that as a marriage,
pornography.
as traditionally a marriage of information.
It's 50 Shades of Grey pornography. Can we describe it?
I've read it, yeah, I read the series, but I mean, it's...
The reason I ask that is because many libraries definitely have it. And it was one of the, and well, interestingly enough, it was the most checked out book at Guantanamo as well. Most often requested book by prisoners at Guantanamo. I read that about 3-4 months ago. I thought, I don't know if it was in translation. I don't know. It just, when I saw many libraries, they find it they had multiple copies because, first of all, being stolen.
Yeah, oh, definitely.
Yeah, but that's a written word, and I know you're talking about the internet.
I mean, we are widening because we do have, film, DVDs didn't start circulating in my library until about 10 years ago. So we have opened that door, and it is a change. So how free do we remain? It is a change.
Well, I think the Meese Commission kind of gave us a phrase that you used too, community standards, to apply that. If your community, depends on how comfortable, again, you're professional first, and you also said, a professional may not sync with your personal beliefs, but if that's, it meets certain community standards, if the community is comfortable with that. Of course, there was also, I can't recall I think it was Potter Clarkson. He said, I can't define pornography, but I know it when I see it. I know it when I see it. But does the guy sitting at the computer next to you, or a gal sitting next to the computer, does he or she know it when he sees it? And for some, that's also a sliding scale or a slippery slope.
Yeah.
Well, I was just going to say, because 50 Shades of Grey, we may not consider it pornography now, but at one point, probably not too distant past in America, it was. And when I worked at a public library in New York State, and we had someone complain about the classical statue. They maybe didn't want masking tapes
Masking
over
tape.
this, but
Or
this
duct
person
tape if
did,
it's a
yeah, this person did complain, and it was
Uh-huh.
very much in the classical, kind of Grecian style, and that was kind of the theme of this building. It was a late 19th century kind of like neoclassical sort of place. That statue certainly seemed to offend him.
Yes.
It didn't seem to bother anybody else, you know. And so yeah, I mean, you get into that
Yeah.
very slippery slope of what is community standards,
Yeah.
because
And it's, it's this, just quickly a drop back, erotica versus pornography. Erotica costs more. But it's also funny because the term pornography and the outcries in the 1800s occurred when erotic classics like the Kama Sutra, others were suddenly available in cheaper editions, and it would harm the less intellectually inclined, if you will, in the hands of the working person or working lower class individual, if you will. Then suddenly you have to watch out. Then it becomes pornography and you have to protect. So I mean, I don't know, again, it doesn't seem that, but I always think of that phrase, erotica one costs a lot more, but to maybe the same thing. And I also think of something else. When I was doing bad books, one of my son's high school friends, he said, I'm reading a book now, and it's got a lot of description of sex in it, but it doesn't have any pictures in it, so it can't be pornography, right? No, it is. Is it one of my banned books possibly? No. But it's funny because it's a perception. For some people it's going to be photos, and sometimes it has to be photos of a certain category. And beautiful women naked are works of art to some. Beautiful men naked are works of art to some. To others it's pornography. To others there needs to be some sort of interaction occurring to be pornography. I mean, it's the same thing with obscenity. Look at the hub of everything. How many times has that poor book been beaten by beaten up by challengers? Challenged because, first of all, it's the dialect of the African American characters. Then it's the dialect of the Southerners. People in the South have complained about that Tom and Huck and Tom sound illiterate, or they don't speak in. Their grammar is improper. Well, it probably is if they were kids. And then there are complaints that Indian Jim is being stereotyped. And then you have the political aspects there, because there are certain aspects of the politicism there. And then there's poor Becky, who's just a handmaiden to Tom. I give up. I think Twain probably spun in his grave so many times by now. And the book was actually taken off the shelf back in 1896, I guess, when it was one of the libraries felt that it just wasn't a good story. I mean, it was folk-telling, basically, and it was folk-telling with poor grammar and dialect, and they didn't want that to be continued, and to have people read that. I mean, it's the poor book, as I said, the book's been off the shelf, and the same, you'll have people of color, people of Caucasian background, people, both hating the book for different reasons. There are multiple reasons you can ban. You have multiple reasons you can, as you said, pornography, the statue. How many murals have been painted over, if you will, and had certain parts covered, or a swath of cloth, because what was classical art wasn't acceptable by the so-called, the community standards of certain members of the community, and the vocal ones. The vocal people will set the community standards usually, or at least make the noise. So. But I think that's a great example of a classical statue.
Can I ask, do librarians or do libraries see themselves as teaching institutions?
That's a great question.
It's a learning institution.
Learning institutions? Well, I kind of, in my mind, I'm trying to figure out why it is that a library seems to have misgivings about turning off certain spigots of this information flood that's coming into society. Because it seems to me that at the core of libraries is a sense of the value of the learning that can go on there for individuals. So there's a value judgment from the very beginning that there's a positive aspect to libraries. And as soon as you are willing to admit that that's one reason we have libraries, it seems to me not offensive that judgments are made as to what information a library provides. And it seems in the past, this hasn't been that big of a problem in terms of too much information, because it's been impossible to have anything like the web up until now. And now we do have the web, and you truly can get anything over the web. And, I'm thinking, a person, I think, has a right to access pornography, but not necessarily in a library. You don't have a right to access pornography in a school. A school can control the kind of learning to a reasonable extent that goes on in the school, because its mission is not to be a spigot that's just on all the time. There are people there making judgments about the kinds of things that are most important for children to learn and become aware of in society. And libraries seem reluctant to assert that kind of judgment. Am I wrong?
Can I stretch that a little bit? If I was a librarian, I wouldn't stock mysteries or romance novels, because I think they're a waste of time. And I don't think that it's really going to help anyone learn and grow. So
That's
say
why brain
get rid of
candy
them.
mysteries, please.
Obviously,
No, I'm
yes.
not in some, but no, that's
So-
true.
But presumably, there's not one person making an acquisition decision, and
Well,
what
yes,
happens
there is.
is...
You're in a small
You're
library.
in a small library.
So I just would like to say that libraries librarians have always sat in judgment, because we've always had to select books.
Uh-huh.
You couldn't buy them all. We have always passed judgment on books, on which ones to buy and which ones not to buy.
And did that make people feel uncomfortable because they might not use that judgment correctly, or?
Mhm.
Yeah, I mean, and there's definitely people who wouldn't buy Shades of Grey.
Yeah.
Librarians
Well,
wouldn't
there's
buy
an
it.
entire class devoted to acquisitions.
Right.
In college,
Yeah.
I think,
Yeah, I mean,
where
you,
you are trained to do
Right.
these types of
Yeah.
things.
And there's a distinction with your purchasing and choosing materials versus with internet filtering, you're actively selecting to deselect
To deselect,
certain things. So I think there's a distinction between not buying pornography and actively blocking it.
I think there's a distinction between types of librarians as well. I mean,
And there's gonna be
academic
different communities
librarians
as well.
and public the public library, to me, you shouldn't be putting, the librarian doesn't have, we're not omnipotent, we can't understand or omniscient. We have no idea where that next thought or that next whatever is gonna come from. Whereas to me, and at least in my academic career, when I was an academic librarian, I was more at the behest of, I worked more to push for sort of the college and the professors. I was kind of a secondary tool, I guess. I don't know.
You were furthering the aims of the academic.
Yeah, exactly. So to me, it was different professionally.
Right.
I don't know if everybody else.
Well, I
feels
would
that
think
way.
with the public library, you're at the behest of, you choose things based upon the community standards. Also, the funding's all dependent upon public funding.
yeah, I mean, when I order, it's not just what I pick, it's a combination of looking through the journals, it's patron requests,
Right, but
it's
that's a shift.
bestseller, it's more than just me picking the
Yeah,
material.
that's historically a shift, though. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Amber Billy. I'm the president of the Vermont Library Association. I'm a little under the weather, so pardon me.
And you're an academic.
I'm a librarian at the University of Vermont. I'm a cataloging librarian, so I don't make any of these, I don't answer questions or anything like that, but I provide access to the information.
She collects metadata.
I do. I collect. I literally work with metadata every day. So historically, librarians have had the debate of give them what they need versus give them what they want. And, for a long time we felt that libraries were these bastions of knowledge, that we should tell them that this is what you need to know. But then come in and you should be able to look at porn. If maybe you're doing a history of the breast enhancements and videos of adult entertainment, why not? And you don't have internet access. If you don't have internet access, the only place that you can get that is at your library. And there aren't bad people, there's only bad actions. So having somebody access porn is very different than having them masturbate.
I would agree with that.
If they masturbate, get the hell out. But if they're looking at porn and it's not, and it's, you know, if you can, then if you can provide them with a space that won't affect anyone around them, or, you know, it is a very complicated debate, but it's one that is shifting constantly.
And when I did my master's work, it was at Ball State University, well known because of a late night talk show host who established a scholarship for C students, David Letterman, he graduated, okay? Now, I was doing my master's work, it's an 18th century British novel, and I wanted to read Fanny Hill. I went into the library, this was 74-ish, 73. And I went to the library, I had read of that, I was doing Tom Jones, the whole 18th century thing though. The Fanny Hill, I wasn't going to include it because it didn't have the stick, I was focusing on the role of the minister and or the religious. But I went in and I asked at the reference desk where I'd be able to find it. And it was in there, but it wasn't on the shelves. Would they have the copy, was a copy out, or could I put my name on the list for it? She said, we have it behind desk. This was at a large university in 1974. She said, are you using it for a course? I said, 18th century British knowledge. She said, that's not being taught that. I said, but I'm doing background for my master's thesis. But we went into a dialogue with that. But of course it was 1974. It was Ball State, or Muncie, Indiana. But I see the look on your face. I know. I thought, am I starting off wrong here? You know, but I was intrigued because the novel itself, it ran through, references were made through a lot of the 18th century British literary analysis, British novel literary analysis. Wow. That was probably my second major situation of feeling a little uncomfortable with what I was asking for at desk, and after that I just lost all fear. You know, I think I just went on. But as you said, right, if there's a difference between the visual, if you will, or the acquisition of, if you call it knowledge or you call it information, whatever it might be, or actually becoming physically offensive, you know, to others around.
Okay. So I was very surprised to hear you say that you're okay with parents censoring what children can access. And I think your example of Madonna's sex as being checked out by a 6-year-old is perhaps a little bit extreme, and I think that more what is being challenged are Tango Makes 3 and, you know, Heather Has Two Mommies, and, you know, when those books are aren't being able to be checked out by children, you're sort of denying them the liberty of self-exploration, but not even just that.
Can't.
But
as a parent, I think I should be, I'll use the word, the ALA uses the term, parents should be the guides of their children. The library should not deny them, like here's the ALA's.
Right, but
that's the crux. Not denying. Sorry.
No. Wait, no.
The library should not deny.
The library
the
should
child.
Right.
That's the crux of the point.
That's it. Yeah.
Yeah,
And
sorry.
I'm going back to falling back on the ALA, you know, and I think it's my role. I had explained condoms to my son when he was 7 years old because he saw something on TV, and it didn't bother me at all because I explained he had seen something else on the increase of AIDS victims and why condoms. He'd seen the news when he was with my parents, so we sat down, we talked about it. So I was very free to talking to him about things, so it would not be a problem. But I still think parents have the major role of.
What age do you think you stopped doing that?
Stopped doing that. With him, I speak personally. I don't stop him. I didn't stop him from reading anything at all. He knew I was the person you can come to ask about almost anything. Anything. Some things he told me probably.
But you are saying you think parents should be able.
Vermont law is 16.
Okay.
See, I don't
And a lot of
have. I
parents
think
have a big
to me it's
issue
a
with
matter of maturity level. You have a child who's 12, who's you feel comfortable about. You have a 21-year-old probably shouldn't know certain things. Shouldn't put a wheel on a driver's wheel in their hands too.
Still trying to figure
No, when you said censor, I think the word is. I think parents should be the major teachers of their children.
But if you have parents who don't think that homosexuality is a good choice, and they have a child that wants to learn about it.
That's what I said, a
Then
library.
Then how can that child learn?
Now, that child can be at the library and read. The child can be, now, that's the other part. That has been, that is a big issue now. I know that libraries try to make that decision when, children, teenagers and younger children, that's really, they're learning that comfort level from, again, I repeat that they're learning the comfort level by reading Tango X3, reading Heather has 2 months, reading about gay youth, reading about the different experiences, because they can't talk to their parents in many cases. And I don't think that it's a matter of my role as, I think it's my role as a parent to be, on the home front, but I'm not saying that you should be censoring them. No. What can I do as a parent? If my child's at the library, maybe that is the only way that child's going to be able to have a free exchange or a free experience in learning about what his feelings or her feelings are. Why? Maybe mommy and daddy have no idea. Most often parents either they're repressive, well, they are definitely repressive, or they prefer to create a child in their own mold, if you will. I think I broke the mold with mine, but yeah. But I think that no, you're asking me about censorship. Now, a parent will do what a parent will do anyway, won't they? Within the household, usually. But the library can be a freer space, a free space.
So you're not saying that the parent should be able to have a list of books at the
No,
library that
no.
their
When
child
I say,
can check out?
when a child,
Or that they can't
if a
check.
child brings something into my house, I would, it was my role to my son. I thought, I felt rather to maybe express my approval or disapproval. But no, I don't think a parent should have that right, that access either, no.
But
It saves lives if they don't have that access, I think.
But in Vermont, if a parent came in and they are on a student's library card, which they have to be.
Oh, they have to?
If they're 16, under
I didn't
16,
know that.
they can ask to see what they're reading.
But can they restrict what they're checking out?
They have to restrict what they're checking out. not
Okay.
us.
Mhm.
But they can have access to what they're
Right,
reading.
so it has the same effect as, I'm not gonna go look at that, I'm not gonna go look at that site because I don't know, somebody might comment. And, be looking over my shoulder.
I
So I'm
haven't-
not gonna look at this stuff because my parents can come in and find out what I'm
But
looking
what I have found is that, it's my home library, and I go back to Garfield, it's my home library. We've had this discussion as well, and the books are on the shelves. Students will spend hours after school doing homework, and maybe they're doing research for their own lives many times, and that's where the freedom of access comes in. There's no Miss Katz at the library desk saying, I'm going to watch you read that book here. It's a different world. But I think that maybe that's more so where I'm headed is maybe a child would be fearful of taking out books, but spending a few hours every day, and unfortunately it has to be a sneak in, sneak out sometimes. And sometimes sneak in, sneak out because of friends who might also be critical, judgmental. No, I don't think parents should have the right to see what their children are reading at the library. Or, look at their library card, I don't. And unfortunately, it's something you have to do because they're children of a certain age, if you will, That's an intriguing question because I'm not at the stage anymore with a child that I would have that, concern about, and yet I never did have concern. I thought whatever he was reading. Thank God he was reading. It's too many people don't read. But no, that's surprising to me. But then again, it goes hand in hand with the local parentis idea of local parentis, I think. And until a certain age, parents have the right to make restrictions. Now, has anyone had that experience with, have any of you had where parents have asked you? No?
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
Yeah? You have? Okay. Unfortunately, looks like it's going to be a case, okay.
I think most of the time they need that because they're trying to find the books under the bed, to be honest.
That's true. Sometimes I need that too. What do I owe? No, actually it's easy now because I can go online to see which books I have that are open to in most cases. This has been Very enlightening though for me as well. Very enlightening for me as well, thank you. I'm glad you did that. Rand, is there anyone else? Share with, whatever else you might have to say to each other. So there were some interesting things that were said today. And it really is my brain candy, honestly.
I'm going to ask you what you think about how the effects on publishing, on the publishing industry, how just challenges have
Self-censorship, oh
Yeah,
yes.
exactly.
Well,
Within the industry.
way back in 1948, when Norman Mailer wrote Naked and the Dead, he wanted to use that four-letter word that starts with F and ends with K, because real people use the word fuck when they're soldiers and they're in war. But he was told by his publisher, you're not getting that book published unless you change the language. He changed it to fug. So every time his character says fug you, or fug this, F-U-G, that's what Norman was thinking something else. Now, self-censorship at that point. I think many publishers, there is self-censorship. Some they know how to get a book published, and depending on the topic. Some are a little more daring than others. Some are not. As I go back to Texas, but with the textbooks, Scott Forsman caved and was willing to put together a textbook that removed a lot of things, a lot of aspects out of the magical religion was fine, but other representations and classic statues as well taken out there, because Texas was willing to buy lots and lots of books. Other publishers haven't. They didn't sell to Texas. They may have sold other places. What else has? I think that I really do believe that 50 Shades of Grey would not have been picked up by a major publisher if it had not already proved its track record, or its attractiveness on multiple internet hits at the site that E.L. James was putting forth. Now she was also a TV producer, so she was wise to the marketing angle. She knew that the internet was the way to gather attention and to gain a following, and then a publisher was willing to take on that possibility, and immediately afterwards the movie deal came up, because it was a winner. So maybe we're getting to the point where we have to say, if it looks like it's got to win, going to be a winning situation, then we'll take a chance on a book that would normally be sold at what I used to call an adult bookstore. Certainly the book is interesting. Every time, what's her name there? Anastasia says, "My inner goddess," or I gag, but I have to deal with it. I think I was offended by the fact she was such an insipid creature, and instead of her, and more so than by the subject matter. And maybe the movie will be in the movie that's being made will be in your library too, as a DVD. That's if it gets good enough ratings. What else? How else has it impacted publishers? Publishers do have the marketing departments. Look, is there a target market for this? Are we going to have a target market? Okay, how far can we go to reach that target market? Is it thousands of sales, or is it hundreds of thousands of sales? So I think it's usually a money decision. But then again, I'm sorry, yes?
Has e-publication affected, I'm thinking particularly of school textbooks, because that's how you actually get around the Texas thing.
Mm-hmm.
Publishers, I understood, are trying to sell more e-textbooks, and one of the reasons is it allows them to do different versions relatively easily for different states. I mean, the two big adoption states traditionally were California and Texas, and they're 2 poles apart, so
Yes.
it was difficult to have one book that would be adopted by both of them and so forth. But what I understand is now happening is the textbook publishers are putting out ebooks and changing the Texas, particularly the Texas versions, to whatever Texas wants, and then selling the standard one to everybody else. And that to me raises a lot of really interesting questions. On the one hand, I think that's good, because at least our textbooks are not getting dumbed down by Texas desire. On the other hand, I think it's horrible, because the kids in Texas are now being easily treated to a weird version of history.
Programmed.
Yeah, they are being programmed in a way. And I think about that a lot, and I'm not sure what the right way to approach that is.
It's cheaper, less expensive for the publishers.
That's
Scott
correct.
Forsman, when they produce those tens and tens of hundreds of thousands of books, that textbook for Texas. The real version that had to be produced cost them money in resetting it. Well, of course, everything's computer set now.
But
It's
now
still
with
production.
electronic
Right.
publication, that's no big deal.
So, that's opened up, well, you said opened up new possibilities for a less expensive distribution of information. But then you're creating these little cells of people who have never seen Mickey in his little sorcerer's uniform, or
Yeah.
who don't see the classical statues, and they wonder what is the big deal about classical Roman statues, or about the Greco-Roman Empire, or the art rather, the murals, when they only see murals. They're just
Another really disturbing thing that I recently read about was how Google tailors search results based on whatever your patterns are, so that when you're researching something, you might give it a search term that if it knows I have a particular slant or a particular interest, I'll get a very different set of results than other people researching the same thing who have a different
I was wondering something too, by the way. If you ever decide to be really nice to your dentist, or whoever has asked you to give us a favorable review, make sure at the bottom that you unclick to share this with Facebook. Because it's automatic, and instead of having to be proactive and asking to share with Facebook, a friend, she was in a relationship, engaged, not anymore. Actually, a young friend, engaged, and she was just curious about a couple of single sites. Well, she didn't unclick, and on her Facebook page appeared, blankety blank has been looking at, and then the name of the singles page there. Why don't you try looking here too? Well, it didn't go over very well with the fiance. Because that then was shared to all of her friends. And Facebook is a whole other story. It's a very deep. I'm on Facebook. But I watch myself. The dumb things people will share, you worry about that. But it's the same as you said, they're right. They're tailored, and you'll find that sometimes that products that have no association with what I think I was searching, pop up.
I mean, that sort of goes with the changing role of librarianship. I mean, part of what we do now is teach information literacy. So we inform our patrons that Google has tailored searches, and that if you sign into your Google account, it's going to track and it's going to modify based on your results.
Do students get that sort of as an orientation?
It depends. UVM is trying to enforce, is trying to create sort of like a common core first year program. But there are other schools that, they're required to take a 1-credit information literacy course, but UVM does not have that at this point. But it's something that if a professor chooses to bring their class in for an information literacy instruction, that's something that the librarians will offer, that we have.
It's not just information literacy, it's critical thought. I mean, they're not being taught in whatever school. We're moving away from the humanities and critical thought why am I taking that stupid history course when I'm a chemistry major or whatever, and we're cheapening education by not teaching critical thought.
And that's something to watch very closely with UVM, with the new president and provost, who are really putting a lot of emphasis on STEM education. I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with STEM education, but it's quite a lot of emphasis
Well,
on
we're producing a nation of vocational school graduates, basically.
You shouldn't be illiterate and graduate college.
Yeah.
Right.
It amuses me. Oh, go ahead.
I just wanted to throw out a nice alternative to Google is DuckDuckGo, which does not track your searches.
Say that again?
It's called DuckDuckGo.
2 ducks in a row.
Yeah. So.
Yeah, there are.
Well, Firefox, Mozilla also doesn't track, and it doesn't keep a history, which is sometimes very beneficial.
Yeah, you have to set it that way, or it has a private browsing. Yeah. Sorry, my library instincts.
Well, no, I have it set that way permanently. Yeah. I don't trust the incognito part of Google, because it's incognito to anyone but Google.
Right.
So
Yeah.
So.
I
I have
hate
to
to cut
say,
you
I
short,
was
but I
pretty-
think that
oh.
I think that our security
Oh,
is,
yeah.
is time limited here in the building. So
Okay.
I want to thank you.
This has
Dr.
been a very
for being
interesting
here.
evening for me as
It's a
well.
really interesting discussion. Glad the audience was here too. It's really very interesting. So thank you.
Thank you.